this is how you get ahead in Hollywood. He said, listen, I'm not getting paid. I'm going to make this right because I don't like what my bosses did to you. I would help fix this as best as I can on my own time. So here's someone who's just giving out of because he wanted to be a good person, and he was giving, but not asking, he was giving. And then whatever, she's working with her for a couple months, and then he lets it out that he wants to be a screenwriter. My wife's like, oh, that's what my husband does. He would be happy to help you out. And I was, and it's only because he had given me so much. He wasn't asking me, he was giving me so much.
Welcome again to Screenwriters Talk Screenwriting. This week's episode is a replay of our interview with TV writer Michael Jamin. He's written for King of the Hill, Rules of Engagement, Just Shoot Me, and several other shows. He also has a new book titled A Paper Orchestra, and he was working on that book during this interview. Please enjoy this interview with Michael Jamin.
Welcome to Screenwriters Talk Screenwriting with your hosts, Jordan Amiola, Kirsten Porter, and Rand Shami.
Screenwriters Talk, Screenwriters Talk, Screenwriters, Screenwriters Talk Screenwriting.
Our guest today is Michael Jamin. He's written and executive produced on many shows, including King of the Hill, the Beavis and Butthead reboot, Wilfred, and Tacoma FD. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you for having me. Hi.
Well, thank you for joining us. We have many questions for you today, and we'll start with what made you want to start writing in the first place?
Oh, well, even as a kid, I wanted to be a writer. Then in high school, I loved Cheers. And I was like, I want to be a writer on Cheers, whatever. But then after college, I moved out to LA to pursue a career in TV writing, and it's been working almost ever since.
Did you ever do any like fan fiction or like a spec script while you were like
Spec
on
script?
Cheers or anything like that when you were in high school and you wanted to write for Cheers?
Well, I didn't even know what fan fiction was back then. I wrote spec scripts in college. I knew what that was, but I never not fan fiction is not. No, I don't know how to do that. So.
I know some kids that would do that. They without even knowing what fan fiction was, but just
I was just writing bad fiction. That was what I was into.
So then how did you end up on Lois and Clark, your first show, right?
That was the first freelance that I sold with my partner. At the time I was working, well, a couple years before that, I was working for some TV producers, and then they went on to create, they wanted to run Lois and Clark, and I came back and I said, hey, can you, can I pitch you an episode? This is after working with them for a couple of years, and they were gracious enough to let us pitch, which is like a big deal when you're two nobodies. And they liked one of the episodes. They bought it, and that was that.
Nice. Do you have a favorite show you've worked on or a favorite experience?
The first staff job was Just Shoot Me, and that was just it might have been like the most exciting experience because that was my first time doing it in Hollywood on a regular basis. That was very exciting. But I wouldn't say, I've had so many fun jobs since then. I wouldn't say it's my favorite or anything, but that was certainly the most exciting time.
Awesome. Yeah, we love Just Shoot Me. When I was growing up, I watched it all the time.
Yeah.
Do you have any good stories with Just Shoot Me?
Oh, yeah. I don't know. There's a ton of good. The cast was lovely. We had a reunion with the cast maybe 6 or 7 years ago, just hanging out with them on the lot. It was always a fun group. The cast genuinely liked each other. They hung out with the writers. It was really, it really was a magical time being involved in that. And I got to work side by side with many writers, some writers who wrote on Taxi and who wrote on Cheers. And so to me, it felt like a big deal to be working next to them and learning from them.
Oh, yeah. One of my favorites characters was Nina Van Horn. And I was wondering if you have any good stories with that character and writing her.
Well, that was played by Wendy, Malik, who's just lovely. And yeah, my partner and I, we wrote a bunch, at least in the first 4 years, we wrote a lot of Nina episodes. We would just come up with ideas for Nina because we love that character so much.
She's amazing.
Yeah. So that was us. A lot of that was us. Coming up with
Well, thank you. As an audience member, thank you for that.
but they were all, honestly, what a great cast that was. It really was an exciting time because that show was up and coming, and this was back when people were watching sitcoms on TV, and these were big times. Not anymore.
You'd wait for that Thursday night or Friday night or whatever to watch the
Thursday,
show.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, NBC must be TV.
Yeah. right.
Yes, that's right.
Do you have any like big lessons you've learned when writing for that show?
I remember, the first season for sure, I felt very over my, in water over my head. I felt I was pretending. I felt really, it was fake it till you make it. And I remember we'd all be pitching on jokes, and the room all the writers were so funny on that show. It was very intimidating, and they would be pitching, and I'd be laughing. I wasn't even pitching; I was laughing, and I just knew this is not good because I'm not getting paid to laugh. I'm getting paid to pitch, right? And I just couldn't beat any of the writers to the punch. They were just so good. And then I remember talking to Marsh McCall, who was he was at the time he had just finished running the Conan O'Brien show, and I was like, man, I don't know. I can't beat these guys. And he gave me some really good advice that really changed the game for me. And it was, he said, you're never going to beat them. They're too fast. So you can't, if everyone's pitching down this one line of thought, you're not going to beat them. You could go around it, find another way to get to the joke. And it didn't even occur to me that there's more than one way to get to the joke. It really didn't. And I was like, oh, and after that, the way he explained it, it really opened everything up for me. And then forget it. Then it was like I was off to the races.
How do you actually overcome that feeling of not feeling as quick as the writers? I feel like it's a common feeling amongst, for instance, support staff in writers' rooms.
Yeah.
What would you say to them when they have those experiences?
Well, opening your mouth to pitch particularly a joke, or anything, but especially a joke, is one of the most intimidating things you can do, because if it doesn't get a laugh, it's just going to lay there and you're going to look like an idiot. Just no way around. People may be polite, but they know you're not a real laugh. And so a good tip is always to have a backup. If you have a joke and it bombs, have a backup. Have a backup to get, as long as you can get a laugh. If people will forget, even if it's not on story, as long as you can get a laugh somehow to the situation, people will remember the laugh. And that's the most important thing. And yeah, I guess, was there anything else I had to say about that? Maybe, but I already forgot. I already bored myself.
Well, have you been working in Zoom rooms? I mean, you just spoke a lot about laughing, and I feel like pitching a joke in a Zoom room isn't quite the same as it once was.
Yeah, that's another thing. That's what I was going to say. If you wind up and you say, I have a joke, it's already dead.
Yeah.
So you have to toss it off like you don't even give a shit. That's how you do it. And I'm particularly good at that, where I kind of lean into the toss it and I run in case it bombs. But on Zoom, it's a little different. You have to get everybody's attention because And so the show I'm currently on, Tacoma FD, it's on Zoom. So for the past 2 seasons.
Wow.
So it's a little trickier. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite joke that you just like love of like all time, all the jokes you've written for all your shows?
People ask me that. I don't remember half the things. I honestly do not remember them. And I think that's important because jokes are disposable and people think they're precious. Oh, my favorite joke. And if it doesn't get in, what will happen? And now it's like, if it doesn't get in, I don't care. I'll come up with another one. Mm-hmm. Stories are not disposable, but jokes are disposable.
Okay, so you can forget about the good jokes easily, but can you forget about the failed ones? Do you have any failed ones that are burnt in your brain?
Yeah, when I think it was just shoot me. We were, my partner and I were writing a script, and I wanted to put this joke in, and he's like, "That's not funny." I'm like, "It's very funny. Trust me. It's not funny. You don't know what you're talking about. It's funny." And I insisted we put it in. So we put it in. It gets to the table read, and the joke just dies. It just bombs. Only I start laughing hysterically because I was so wrong. I'm laughing. This is the funniest I've ever been through. And because I'm laughing, everyone thinks my partner wrote the joke. And now they're looking at him, calling him out for his shitty joke. And now I'm laughing even harder. That's how you sell your partner out.
Awesome. How long have you been with your partner, your running partner?
We've been writing together since the early 90s.
Oh, wow.
Awesome. How'd you guys, can you tell us about him? Like, what's his name? How'd you guys meet?
His name is Sivert Glarum. He's extremely, extremely talented writer. We were both teamed up. We were both signed individually by an agent, talent agent, and then she teamed us. We were interested in writing with a partner. She teamed us up.
Nice. Are you both on Tacoma FD right now?
Yeah, we do everything together except for this a book that I'm writing on the side, but everything else we do together.
What makes a successful partnership, writing partnership?
It is literally like a marriage. I mean, we've been together for longer than many people have been married. At this point, there's a lot of trust. There's a lot of, at the end of the day, I don't think either one of us cares if it's our idea. I don't care if it's mine, if it's his. If it's his, he's got a better idea. Let's do it. Whatever gets me home earlier that's the one we want to do. So there's a lot of trust and a lot of, we don't really fight over. Once you've done it for long enough, your ego goes out the window. It's no longer about the excitement of seeing your words on the screen. It's really more about, okay, this is the job. And how do we serve the story? Because the story is ultimately is the boss. What's the best path to serve the story? And then we get to go home.
And throw any bad jokes, the blame for any bad jokes at them.
Yeah, I mean, he mostly, that's mostly my category, my specialty, but yeah.
What's the division of labor like in your writing partnership? Do you split scenes or do you co-write them in a room together?
Yeah, we literally sit in the same room together. We have one laptop with 2 monitors. And so we literally pitch the lines out loud. We say every line of dialogue out loud. It might be less important for drama, but for a comedy, you don't know if it's funny until someone laughs.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely feel I've worked with a lot of writing partners and a lot of teams and a lot of individuals. And I always feel like the teams tend to put together tighter scripts simply because you really have that extra step. Is it funny or not?
Yeah.
So I enjoy your podcast.
Thank you.
I know you talk about like working your way up from like staff writer to executive producer to showrunner. Can you tell us like what's the biggest challenge you faced on becoming a showrunner?
Well, so the next step below showrunner is co-executive producer, and many people spend years at that level before getting the bump to showrunner. Now, it's co-exec's a pretty sweet gig. And the money's good and you don't have all the responsibility, but you're always, no matter who you are, you're always going to second guess your boss. You're always going to think you can do it better than the boss. Then when you finally get the bump to, showrunner, like the difference is really high, and there's a lot more pressure, a lot more responsibility. And it all comes down to having the confidence of knowing story structure, how to break a story. And that's the biggest hurdle, is knowing, because you have to, you're breaking the stories, you're figuring out what all the beats are. And then when you go to the table read and something bombs, it's on you to figure out why it's not working and how to fix it fast. And all the writers, they want to go home. They don't want to be there till midnight because you can't make a decision. You have to make a decision and hopefully make the right one.
I'm similar to being a director.
Being the director?
Yeah, I've like being decisive.
Yeah, make a decision, even if it's wrong, make a decision.
Yeah.
That's awesome advice. And by the way, for our listeners, the podcast is called Screenwriters Need to Hear This.
Yeah.
So check it out. Kind of going back to Just Shoot Me, David Spade is also on Rules of Engagement. You've also worked on that show. Is that a coincidence that David Spade was on both those shows?
Yeah. I mean, we were hired, how did we get in Rules? We had a deal we had an overall deal at CBS Productions, and they stuck us on the show as part of to work off our salary. And it just so happens that Spade was there. And so, yeah, Spade he's a pleasure. He's a pro. He always brings it on show night. He's very easy to work with.
Any good David Spade stories?
Any good David? I don't really know. I'm certainly not at liberty to tell his stories, but yeah, I guess I don't really have any good Spade stories. But again, you pitch him a joke and he'd say, I don't really want to do that. And you say, okay, well, think of something else. He goes, let me just try it. And then he had show night, he would just try it and to get a huge laugh. I mean, that's just how he is. He's just, he's really good at what he does.
Yeah. That was a good story though.
Right.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah.
So then jumping forward in your career, you did King of the Hill, and the blue collar families in Texas are represented very well, very accurately. From what I've heard, I'm not from Texas, so I don't actually know. I just know a bunch of people who say that. And I was wondering, how are you from Texas? How are you able to write that?
Well, no, I'm from New York, but there were a lot of Texas writers on our show to help keep the authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also took a road trip, not a road trip, but we took a field trip to Texas to kind of absorb the local culture.
Nice.
But that's how it was. And if you had a question about something, one of the local writers would help you out.
Did you ever, as a New Yorker, just roll your eyes at these Texans and have a totally different experience from your childhood?
The thing about Texas, when you go there, it's not the state of Texas, it's the Republic of Texas. And they're very proud of it. They have the flag, and it's a very different culture. And so you want to honor that. And I wouldn't roll my eyes, but you would ask, I would ask the other writers, really? That's how you guys do it there,
Yeah. So where did the Texan writers come from? Were they based in LA, or did people go
There were
out?
writers who moved to LA to pursue their dream and then broke in.
Nice.
But there were several of them,
I think Bobby Hill is probably my favorite character in the show. Were there any challenges you had writing a preteen or teenager main character?
I honestly you don't even think of him as a child because he's so emotionally intelligent. No, it was, you just think back to your own child. What are things that obviously girls in high school, stuff like that. So it wasn't as hard as you might think it is to channel Bobby Hill. It's not for me.
Was he similar to you as a child?
He was probably cooler.
Bobby Hill?
Bobby Hill had more confidence than me. Bobby had swagger. No.
Were there any characters in all your career that you've had trouble like trying to tap into?
Not that I'll admit.
That's okay.
What you usually do is you pitch in their voices. Once part of the job of the writer is to really listen and to hear how people talk. And then, actually, when we were doing, my partner and I ran a show called Maron with starring Marc Maron. Mm-hmm. And, part of that, I'd literally be sitting next to Marc all the day, because he was one of the writers. And we sit all the time. And I remember pitching a line and he looked at me and goes, I'd never say that. And I go, you absolutely would say it. I've heard you say that. He was like, I do? Yeah, man, that's what you say. He was like, really? So that's part of the deal. You listen to them and you mimic them. You make fun of them by mimicking,
Yeah.
Did he say that line in the show?
Oh, I'm sure he did. I'm sure he did. Yeah. He was a good sport. He just was like, I didn't realize I said that. He talked like that. Yeah, man. That's because I'm
one of my favorite characters from King of the Hill is Boomhauer. And you can't really understand anything he's saying. No. I can't. So how do you go about writing a character who the audience isn't going to understand what they're saying?
Well, first of all, he never said anything important. You never got information out of him. So it really didn't matter if you understood it. It was just like an attitude. You dang old man talking about it. And then you're like, okay, Boomhauer's, he's getting his thoughts out, but it doesn't really matter what he says. You could just tell by his attitude that he approved or didn't approve, and that was it. But he wouldn't deliver any important exposition or pipe. Like he was, there are not many Boomhauer stories on that show either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
how would you write his dialogue?
Literally dang old, and then you write some other mishmash words in there, and then talking about type some other words. Okay. There was a real art to it in the beginning. Mike had a real art to it. So you kind of ask the other writers, hey, does this sound right?
What was the purpose of that character then, besides being just somebody to love?
I think that's part of the local Texas culture, is like there are people who have a thick, drawl or accent you can't understand, and that's part of their charm, and that's what people in Texas say. They go, yeah, that's my father-in-law, whatever. I don't know what so that's just about the authenticity. He didn't really add much in terms of plot usually.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. So speaking of another Mike Judge show, Beavis and Butthead, could you talk about how you got onto Beavis and Butthead?
That was a couple years later, and the showrunners of King of the Hill, we were friends with, we worked with on a number of times, and they wound up taking over the new Beavis and Butthead, that's all done by Freelance. So they need freelance episodes. So they reached out to me and my partner. They said, hey, do you guys want to pitch a couple of freelances? We're like, yeah. So again, we pitched, I don't know, whatever, 10. We sold, I think, 4 or something. And then we would go in to the record session. We literally watch music videos on a laptop, and we sit with Mike and we watch his videos, and then we poke fun of the people in the videos, and then Mike would nod, and then he'd go into the booth and do it as Beavis and Butthead. But the other parts were scripted. The storylines were all scripted.
How was the freelance writing experience different from being in a room, and do you have a preference?
Well, you don't make much money as a freelancer. I mean, you can't even make a living writing freelance. So this was just something we did on the side because we wanted to say we wrote for Beavis and Butthead. It was like fun. So yeah, the preference is to be a staff writer for sure. It's just that was a low budget show, so they didn't have staff.
So you worked with a ton of showrunners, like 13, 14 different shows. Do you have a favorite showrunner, or do you have any like advice from a showrunner you've learned that you've kind of kept with you? I've
learned from so many great showrunners, Steve Levitan and Chris Lloyd and Greg Daniels are some of the bigger ones. And you can learn, I kept a book. What else? Here it is. I got my book. Here's my book. And I would just, every time I learn something, I write it down. And so, yeah, they all have a different way of approaching story, but very thoughtfully. And that's how you really learn story structure, which is the goal, right? That's everything in writing. Jokes are not in the beginning, at least back in the day, you could divide a writer in comedy. You'd be like a joke person or you're a story person. That's what people would ask. You just line up into two different camps. And I certainly was a joke person in the beginning. My partner was more of a story person. But as I progressed in my career, I'm definitely half and half now, because story is everything. The jokes, whatever, we can come up with more jokes, but the story has to hold together.
So when you became a showrunner, how did you find your method, your way of being a showrunner?
Yeah, that was something my partner, when we took that first job, we reached out to our old, mentors. We're like, hey, any advice? What's your advice? And they said, yeah, this is how many stories you need to break per week. This is, things like I just told you, like make a decision, doesn't matter what it is. But also, when you're at this point, we'd already been writing for, I don't know, at least 10 years or so. So it's like you're watching them do it, and that's how you learn. The problem, I think, sometimes now is when people get to that place of showrunner too fast and they're not ready. There's so much, you really need the time. I certainly wasn't ready the first several years of my career. No way. So yeah, experience counts for a lot.
To shift topics, I personally was a huge fan of Wilfred, so I'm wondering, what was it like to adapt an Australian series for an American audience? What did you have to take into account, and why did you change what changed?
Well, so that show was created by Jason Gann in Australia, and then David Zuckerman, who we worked with on King of the Hill, he did the American version, and he kind of took all what he thought was the best parts of the Australian version and kind of put it into a pilot and kind of reconceived it in a little bit to make what I thought was an excellent pilot. And then he hired a staff to help create other storylines. So, but Jason Gann who played the dog, the talking dog. He was in the writer's room the whole time. He's one of the writers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when we would pitch a storyline, you'd look at him, hey, can you play that? Say yes or no.
Well, that's fun.
Yeah. So have you seen the Australian version?
Yeah, but I mean, not a long time ago. I watched them. Yeah.
But before you started writing on the show?
No, I only when we were interested in working on the show did I start. I hadn't even heard of it.
And then I've seen little bits and pieces of it, but I've heard it's much weirder and darker. And so why did they decide to? The whole team decide to make it less weird and less dark?
I didn't at all. I mean, that was David Zuckerman's decision when he created the pilot. But the show Wilfred was pretty, from my memory, it was pretty dark. I mean, the show is about you had to write every episode. It had to work on two levels. You have a guy, Ryan is the character, and his magic talking dog. Or is Ryan mentally ill, and is the dog just a projection of all his internal thoughts? And so every line of dialogue had to work on both levels. And so you're dealing about, it's a show ostensibly about mental disease. And so that's already a little dark.
Yeah. How do you write about mental illness in a compassionate and informative way?
I don't know if we did. You were just at the other half. You're like, well, that's also, we want to see the dog get high and dance too. So, yeah. I mean, I don't really know, but it was, obviously the guy being flipped, but the guy, I'm not sure if we ever diagnosed him as having mental illness, but he was talking to an imaginary dog. So there's something going on in him, I'm not sure, you need the, I don't know. There's something going on.
Yeah, and in the beginning, he's dealing with depression, or
Yes.
he's suicidal. So there's that too.
Yeah, there's that. Right.
Well, I think you I think you did a great job of
All
the
right.
mental illness.
So kind of moving forward to present, I've been watching a lot of Tacoma FD. What's it like working with the Broken Lizard people? And did you know them beforehand?
No, we met on that show, and those guys are great. So Kevin Heffernan and Steve Lemmy created the show. They're two of the guys from Broken Lizard, and they created the show. But they have a lot of independent movie experience, but they'd never done any TV. And so obviously my partner have a lot of TV. So we were kind of brought on to show them how, like, okay, this is how we can churn it out on a regular basis and not go crazy. And so that's why they brought us on. And they're just wonderful. First of all, they're both those guys are very funny and talented. They're very sweet. It's very important for them to have a room where like people are cordial and friendly and not mean, and it's not nasty. So they just couldn't be easier and easier to work for, just more lovely people. So, and then of course they're in the room, you pitch a joke or a storyline and you go, hey, what do you guys, you want to play that? Are you okay? Are you playing with that? And they're like, and then you kind of tone it or you change it to, that's one of the advantages of having the actor in the room, because you know if they're going to be able to sell it or not.
Do you prefer having the actor in the room?
As a rule, no, you never want to have an actor in the room. But if they're also the showrunner, if they're an actor writer, then yeah, then if they're the star of the show, yeah. And we've worked on a number of shows where that's the case. Then if they are, if they created the show and they have that kind of voice, you want them in the room. But if they're just an actor, you don't want them in the room.
You mentioned the room right now is on Zoom. How big is the room? And also, do you plan on going back to in person?
That's not up to me. That's up to the studios and liability. I guess there's like around 10 of us or so in the room. We just wrapped on Friday, so there are about 10 of us, including one or two assistants, maybe. So, what
are your responsibilities as co-EP?
Well, basically, it's basically the story structure. So when someone pitches an idea, it's up to the higher level writers to figure out whether this idea has enough meat on the bones, and if so, how do we literally break it on the board? How do we lay it out? What are those moments? What are the act break moments? What are we building to? What's the middle of act two? And so all that structure, that's not something you would ordinarily know. Like a lot of times I remember as a young writer pitching an idea and not even knowing if it's a good idea or not. And then some other writer would pitch an idea and it would be well received. And you're like, well, how did they do that? How do they know? And so that's where I'm at now. Is I'm the guy who says whether it's a good idea or not, because you've been doing that long enough, whether it has enough meat on the bones, and then how to unfold it in such a way that the audience will hopefully be compelled to continue watching.
So now you're also teaching screenwriting, and what inspired you to share your knowledge and help up and coming writers?
That happened. This has been a long project. I have a friend, Phil, who I co-host the podcast with. He went to film school, and then when he got out, he was asking me questions, but read my script, that kind of thing. And so I talked to him, and I was like, well, that's not how we approach story in the real world. And I would sit down and go, this is how I do it. And then he was like, why didn't I learn that in film school? And I'm like, I don't know. Can you get your money back? And he was hounding me to make a course. He's like, I have so many friends that they would love this. Like, well, I'm not really interested. I don't have the time or whatever. And then the pandemic hit, and I had nothing. But for the first 6 months, like I had nothing going on. I had no pilots. I had no project. Like everything was dead, and I knew it would be. And so I was like, all right, let's make this course, Phil. And so that's how that happened. And then of course now, I was back at work about maybe a year afterwards. But that was a long 6 months. We had nothing going on.
How did you meet Phil?
Oh, that's a good story. So I didn't know Phil. My wife has a brand of girls' clothing called Twirly Girl, and she was building a website, and she found this company, whatever, in the middle of nowhere, and they overpromised and underdelivered. And Phil was working there, as that was part of his job as an SEO, search engine optimization, and he was disappointed with how his bosses oversold the company, their promise and underdelivered. And he got on the phone with my wife. This is how you get ahead in Hollywood. He got on. He said, "Listen, I'm not getting paid. I'm going to make this right because I don't like what my bosses did to you. I would help fix this as best as I can on my own time. So here's someone who's just giving out of the, because he wanted to be a good person and he was giving, but not asking, he was giving. And then whatever, she's working with her for a couple months, and then he lets it out that he wants to be a screenwriter. My wife's like, oh, that's what my husband does. He would be happy to help you out. And I was, and it's only because he had given me so much. He wasn't asking me, he was giving me so much.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So be a good person.
Yeah.
And then you get ahead in Hollywood. I actually
Yeah,
feel like I haven't heard that.
Help people first, because everyone's always like, help me. It's like, well, it's the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
Help someone else, and then they will feel compelled to help you because out of guilt.
Yeah. Guilt those people. Guilt the people with kindness.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any writing advice you want to rehash for emerging writers who are listening right now?
Any advice. I have, so I've been posting every day on social media for, I don't know, maybe 8 months or something now, every day on TikTok and Instagram. So if anybody wants to, I post every day, daily writing tips on how to be a better writer, how to break into the industry. And you can follow me on Instagram or TikTok at Michael Jamin Writer. So don't ask for all of my advice. I will give you all of it.
Can people ask on social media for certain advice and you'll answer it on social media?
I mean, I say the same thing. If you leave a question, leave a comment, and if I feel like enough people want to hear the answer, I'll answer. But if I feel like it's specific to just you, I keep a long list of questions. So I want to help people. I don't want to just, help as many people. I don't want to just help one person. So
did Phil inspire this social media journey?
Yeah, that was also from a project I'm working on. I was like, I need a large social media following for a project I'm working on. So I was like, all right, well, how do you do that? Give away everything you know. So
what's the project?
It's a collection of personal essays, which is forthcoming. It's called the Paper Orchestra. And if anyone wants to read a sample story from that, you can just go to you can go to michaeljamin.com/story, or you can go to my profile and click the Paper Orchestra and the link, and you get a sample story from that.
And you said personal essays. So is that more focused on your career and writing, or is it more personal life?
It's a little bit of both. I've always been a huge fan of David Sedaris. I mean, I've read everything he's written, probably 4 or 5 times. And then I was like, man, I should probably wonder what that would be like if I did that. And so that's what inspired me. This is my own version of, stories. But as I say, like, I'm not famous. I'm not a person of note. No one wants to hear what my 4th grade, teacher thought about me or whatever. I'm not, I'm not a world leader. So the details are from my life, but the stories are really yours. I'm really trying to tell your story, but the details are mine. So it's much less, you really take the ego out of it, and you really try to, I'm always approaching it, even as a way a television writer or a screenwriter would, is like, I feel a strong obligation when I'm writing anything, whether it's a personal essay or a screenplay, is I want to make sure I'm entertaining the audience, because if I'm not, they'll find something else to do, so I'm not begging them to watch. I have to give them that, is like, don't give them a reason to leave, give them a reason to stay. So I feel so when I talk, so some of the stories, it's a long way to answer your question, but yeah, so some stories are like how I broke into Hollywood, but not because I think TV writers want to know. I think it's because people want to hear a story about, just someone struggling in their young, early 20s, and what that's like, and what that loneliness and that frustration is. And so it's not like a how-to. It's more like, hey, we're all human. Let's just share these stories.
Totally. Is there a date we can expect these personal essays to be released?
I'm not quite done. I got them all here. I'm constantly working on it. I have a couple more I have to finish, and then we'll talk with my agent about what the next steps are. Yeah.
Oh.
We'll look out for it on your social media.
Yeah. Thank you.
So you've written a lot of TV shows. Have you ever dabbled into movie writing?
My partner and I rewrote 3 movies. We've sold 2 of them and vowed never to do it again. It's not, if you in film, the director is the boss. And the writer is just, okay, the person who writes the script. In TV, the writer really is the boss. The showrunner is the boss, not even the director. So it's just, to me, it's just more satisfying. You can, So movies are getting harder and harder to sell now, but like even 15 years ago, you could make a pretty good living selling movies that never, ever get made, ever. And you could have a big house on Mulholland Drive with a view and everything, and you have nothing to show for it. You just have to, other than the checks, because they don't make movies. They buy them, but they don't really make them. It's really like a miracle to get a movie made. And that doesn't really appeal to me. I wanted to, I can write a TV show in 3 weeks. You're watching it on the air, So to me, that's just more exciting.
What were the movies that you sold?
We sold 2 to 20th Century Fox, and one was called Only Child. It was a high concept movie about a kid, about a spoiled kind of, I guess he was in I'm trying to remember. He's like 30s. It was about a spoiled guy who thinks his life would have been better if he had siblings, because then they would help out aging mom and dad. And then one day magic happens and he wakes up and he's got instant siblings who drive him crazy. And the other was like a teen stoner comedy called Student Teacher. That was funny. My partner came up with that idea. It was like, hey, that's a funny name for a title for a movie, Student Teacher. So you can figure out what it's about, a student who passes himself off as a teacher for a year.
And did both of those not get made?
Yeah, neither got made. They sold, we got the check. But like I said, movies don't get made. They just get bought. So, and everyone was happy with them. This Only Child was killed because at the time they had another project set up called Middle Child at the same studio. And so Middle Child killed Only Child, but Middle Child didn't get made. Neither have gotten made. And it's very common. These studios, the executives, there's a lot of turnover. They usually keep a job for 2 or 3 years, and then they leave for another studio, and then that movie's dead. No one's going to resurrect it. There's nothing to be gained by they're not going to take it with them. It's not their property, and it's just going to die there, because the new person at the studio is not going to take someone else's garbage and try to turn it into gold. They'd rather make their own project and turn it into gold. There's nothing to be gained by taking their project. So that's why I think it's just silly. It's silly for me. I was like, I don't want to do this again.
So both kids died.
Both
sad.
kids died.
So do you have a favorite actor or director that you've loved working with?
I've worked with so many actors, directors. I would say Rob Cohen, and who's been a dear friend who was a writer I worked with on many shows, and then became a director. And now he just recently directed a bunch of Somebody Somewheres. Remember that show, Somebody Somewhere? That was a wonderful show. Yeah, did a bunch of those. I love working with him, but also Steve Pink, who directed Hot Tub Time Machine, or did he write it or direct it? I don't know. Sorry, Steve, but he's wonderful. And we worked with him on a show starring these 2 YouTubers named Brett and Link. And I remember in the beginning, Steve and I did not get along, but we learned to love each other. And he's a wonderful director, and I really trust him with my work. So he's great.
Nice.
Nice.
You should have him direct your movies if they weren't dead.
Yeah.
So you've written live action and animation. Which do you prefer and why?
When I'm working on live action, I prefer animation. When I'm working animation, it's just because, well, first, the problem with animation, the hours are pretty good, but it tends not to be Writers Guild. It tends to be covered by IATSE or the Animation Guild, which is not as good a union. But there are some advantages. You can get great acting talent easy, because they're happy to show up for very little money, to sit in front of a microphone. They don't need hair and makeup, and they have fun. So I've worked with some wonderfully talented, A-list celebrities on all the animated shows I've done. So that's cool. Live action sometimes is fun let's see it on its feet, but it depends. We have an animated project we're working on now, and a live action pilot. So we'll see which happens first.
Awesome. So you kind of already talked about the movies that weren't produced. Were there any TV shows that were your passion projects that didn't get produced?
Sure. You sell it's similar in TV. You'll sell a pilot. The odds of selling a pilot are very low, but if you sell it, great, you get a check, and it could be a sizable check. But the odds of it actually getting shot are very low. And the odds of it, once it gets shot, to getting on the air are like almost non-existent. So yeah, I've made a long career of selling projects that wind up, in someone's trash can. But That's okay. That's part of the deal.
It's still.
Do you have a
career.
favorite? Yeah. Do you have a favorite one? You're like, oh, I wish that one.
Oh, listen, every time you write a script, you go, you wish it's this one. I mean, you fall in love with it and then it's dead. So I don't think there's one more so than any of the other ones. So you love it, but also sometimes sometimes like someone will pitch you an idea. A producer will pitch you their idea and you're like, I don't know, but you do it anyway. And then you sell it. And then as you start writing it, you fall in love with it and you forget that it's really their idea because it's yours now. You put so much into it. You honestly forget that it's theirs. You think it's yours.
You mentioned you're currently working on both a live action and animated show. Any details you can share about that, or is it still under wraps?
Not yet. I don't talk about it until the ink is signed. The ink dries. And then I'm like, then I announce. But right now it's there's still a couple things we're waiting on, some details we're waiting on. So
well, we'll keep an ear out. And we like to end our podcast episodes with a question we ask all our guests, which is, what is your favorite show that you're watching now or of all time? Well,
I watched the pilot of Somebody Somewhere. I thought that was one of the best pilots I've ever seen. It was messy in a perfect way and not over explained. It was a little like, what's this? I'm not sure what's going on here. And you have to catch up to it. And so I thought that was beautifully done because it was not perfect. It was intentionally a little dirty. It was wonderful. So I love that. I watched Severance, which I love. What was the other question? What was the second part?
Of all time.
Of all time? My favorite shows of all time?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I guess I tend to look at things from a point of view as a writer. And I remember finishing Breaking Bad and thinking, like, was this written by God and just given to them? Everything was so perfect. I was like, how did they do that? But that's drama, and I'm not a drama writer, but I was blown away by how amazingly written it was.
If you could do the reboot, would you do the reboot
Of Breaking Bad?
Yeah.
No,
Comedy style.
Leave it alone. Don't ruin it. Leave it alone.
What if God came down, gave you the script?
That would be
you
different.
got the credit.
Sure, I'll sign up for that.
Is Cheers still on your list? You mentioned Cheers a lot.
I love Cheers. Once in a while I'll put on an old episode of Cheers, and I loved what I really like about that show is how it's not. There's some always big laughs and big jokes, but it wasn't joke, which is the pacing of many shows today. And I just don't. Even though I can do that and I can write that, I prefer not to watch that.
Mm-hmm.
So I watched Barry last night. Loved it. Loved Barry.
Oh, good show.
But again, it's not joke, but it's funny.
Wait, do you prefer to write joke, or?
It's whoever's handing me money. That's why I prefer to write for. But I can do it either way. When I personally, I like dark comedy. As I've gotten older, I prefer not to write joke because I don't know. I just like let the moment land. And even when you see like my personal essays, I'm not trying to make it. I'm not trying to. To me, it's more interesting not to do that. The power of comedy is when not to use it, in my opinion. It's when not to use it. If you're really good at it, don't use it all the time.
That should be on your social media. There's a tip
I've mentioned that before. It's like that's where it's most powerful. It's like once you get people to laugh, great, they lower the guard and then punch them right in the heart and punch them hard, but not with a joke, and let it sit there. The problem often in some shows is like you'll get to a moment of heart and then they ruin it with a joke. It's like, no, man, let it sit there. Let the uncomfortable play. Let people leave, because that emotion, I feel, is way more powerful than a laugh. It's just that uncomfortable, that awkwardness is just it's so powerful. Mm-hmm. And I say this as a joke writer.
Yeah, that means something.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's all the questions we have for you today, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your stories and your insights. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good luck to all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Screenwriters Talk Screenwriting. Subscribe, rate, and review for more episodes.
Hey, if you're interested in one-on-one coaching sessions, I'd love to help you during your creative process to make sure your project gets finished. To book coaching sessions, you can email me at jordanthescreenwriter@gmail.com. Or you can book your first session on my website at www.jordanimiola.com. That's JORDANIMIOLA.com. Now, here's the joke of the podcast. Today's joke is the joke to go I got when leaving the National Comedy Center. In the last podcast episode, I mentioned how much I love that comedy museum with my client and friend, Cheryl Chase. Here's the joke. What's Forrest Gump's password? 1 Forrest 1.